All right, next item up, we have item number 16 this morning, and excited about having this item on here. It's our district oratorical contest winner is with us this morning, and at this time I'm going to ask Mr. Jerome Elvis with the American Legion to come forward and say a few words.
Thank you, Judge, members of the Commissioners Court. I am Jerome Iltis. I'm the commander of the 23rd District of the American Legion, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here to publicly thank you for allowing us to use the courthouse for our district oratorical contest. And I'd like to thank specifically Joey Tapia, bailiff, for his assistance to help us show us around and help us with the program, the contest. What is the American Legion and what is the oratorical contest? A lot of people don't know either, and the best way I have to explain it is to tell you what I ask veterans, military veterans, when I see them. I ask them if they feel they have a sense of obligation to continue serving their country after their discharge from military active duty. And unanimously, they'll always say yes. And I say, well, how better to do that than in the American Legion? I tell them that the American Legion is the oldest and largest veteran service organization in the country. We've been around for over 100 years. And I tell them that we have a very noble purpose. Our overarching purpose is for God and country. And we associate ourselves together for 10 specific purposes. The very first one of those 10 purposes is to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. Well, how do we do that? We don't wear the uniform anymore. We do it by teaching our youth about it through this awesome program we call the Oratorical Contest. It's a speech contest where the contestants, high school students, speak about the Constitution. They're required to speak for 8 to 10 minutes about some aspect of the Constitution with no notes. And so they have to research their speech, compose it, memorize it, and deliver it to an audience which includes 5 distinguished, prominent citizens. So I always ask them after their speeches, before we announce the winner, do you know more about the Constitution now than before the contest? And unanimously, they'll always say yes. I say, well, by virtue of them saying yes, we have fulfilled our purpose to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. So with that, again, I thank you for allowing us the use of the courthouse. Awesome venue to have the contest, and I hope we can use that again in the future. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. At this time, so I was actually able to attend and listen to these fine young people. This was, what is it called, area or regional?
This is district.
District, okay, so district contest, so there were actually students from Laredo at that
yes,
contest.
The district is an 8-county region of Southwest Texas that includes the counties of Webb, Jim Hall, Maverick, Dimmitt, Zavala, LaSalle, Frio, and Medina.
Awesome. So they were fantastic, the orations that they gave. And at this time, I'm going to introduce, and Aidan is going to give his for us this morning. So Mr. Aidan Fish was the winner of that contest. He is 16 years old. He's a junior at Medina Valley High School. Is that because he's 16 or Medina Valley or juniors or all of them?
All 3 of them.
Awesome. His parents are Jonathan and Christy Fish. So in Aidan's free time, he competes in several UIL events, including literary criticism. He also participates in the legal office procedures competition in the Business Professionals of America. He's also an extemporaneous speaking competition at speech and debate tournaments. His hobbies include reading Southern literature, baking cookies. Didn't see any cookies with you this morning. And spending time with his dog. Aidan would like to study economics in college with a goal of working at an international agency which assists poorer countries. Also, he hopes one day to work on a political campaign and eventually run for an elected office. Ladies and gentlemen, would you welcome Mr. Aidan Fish, winner of the contest? The stage is yours, Aidan. So he's going to give his oration at this time for the contest.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the court for allowing me to give my speech here today. I thoroughly appreciate the opportunity. I love Taylor Swift. It is one of the great facts of my life. I'm a dedicated Swiftie, and it relates to just about anything that I do. There is no way for me to avoid it. Every element of life, including the Constitution, I like to think I can tie to Miss Taylor Swift. Both the Constitution and Miss Taylor Swift especially were burned by a power greater than themselves, and they sought empowerment through a way of authenticity, by expressing who they really were, by saying their truth. So today, that's what we'll be talking about, how the Constitution enables us to speak our truths, and specifically our truths via dissent, disagreeing opinions. And we're going to talk about this through three primary means. First, the right to actually speak and to criticize within society. Second, the right to protest. And third, and possibly most importantly, the right to vote. The year was 1798, and John Adams was the second president of these United States. He was a founding father, a wealthy industrialist, and had a strong history of pro-free speech attitudes. He had defended unpopular positions, as with British Captain Thomas Preston, and had made difficult decisions within his life. Throughout this advocacy for free speech, he emerged as a leading figure in his society. Yet as president in 1798, he helped pass the Alien and Sedition Acts, which said that anybody who uttered, published, or promoted any false, scandalous, or malicious information could be charged with a crime and sent to jail. Now, the modern standard for false, or scandalous, or malicious is very, very vague. I know myself firsthand that it could be lunchroom gossip, it could be a tweet sent out, it could be small little tidbits of information. It could be TMZ or the New York Post. The effect of this was to stifle speech. This president, who was so strong of a free speech advocate earlier in his days as a founding father, went against the freedom of the people, went against free speech when he was in power, because he knew that the rights that free speech gives enable citizens. It makes the job of leaders more difficult, and that is a good thing. But he didn't like that. He couldn't support that, because it would hold him accountable. Next, we can look to more modern examples, like the Watergate crisis. Many prominent people, through the work of relatively unknown individuals, Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, were brought down. This had big ramifications for the present. Altogether, without that ability to criticize, leaders would not be held accountable. The role of the public would have nothing to do with the role of the leader, and government would not be able to stand as an institute for the people. In our own House of Representatives, the ability to criticize is incredibly relevant. There were a crazy, chaotic few days of House speakership votes, and House members showed us very definitively that they were very fond of using their freedom of speech. Well, this same right did not exist for British members of Parliament during the colonial era. They could speak their piece when in Parliament. They could say what they wanted behind closed doors, whenever it was just them in the room debating bills. But as soon as they stepped out of Parliament, they lost the ability to speak freely. The result is that the status quo continued. Progress became harder to advance. This continues to the present. Today, you must have freedom of speech in order to advance your cause. Similarly, we see Twitter as a means of mass media. Other platforms like Instagram and Facebook popularize dissent. They make it public so easily in a way that was never available before. And while I would be the first to admit that there are all kinds of vile, disgusting, and just general kinds of free speech that I don't frankly want to hear, the fact that people can have opinions that I disagree with is the same right that I have to express opinions that they would disagree with. It enables debate in society, and it pushes us away from that status quo and towards progress. Next, we can look to protests as a means of advancing freedom of speech and dissenting opinions. In 1913, around 5,000 women organized in Washington, D.C. There were floats and gowns and what was basically a long procession down Pennsylvania Avenue. Yet it was a peaceful procession with posters and signs and chanting. There were no weapons, nobody was being hurt. They were simply expressing a desire for suffrage. Yet nevertheless, members of the public came out and they assaulted these women, these peaceful protesters who were just expressing their peace. We must ask why this happened. And we can see in the present that the influence of the ability to vote and women as voters would hurt some of these people because they didn't want to let go of their power. They didn't want to live in a more equal, more fair society. The advocacy for this progress came as a result of protest. It came as a result of unpopular opinion. And those that sought to stifle these opinions sought to stifle progress. In a similar scenario, we can look to civil rights protests in 1965, a 54-mile march from Selma to Montgomery, whereupon protesters and marchers were injured simply for expressing a belief in equality. People have the power to make change, and the ability to make change can be a threat to leaders. But this is a threat in the sense that it provokes change. It makes a society more like its people, a place where more people would want to live, where more people can hear their voices represented and accurately told within the story. We can look to some more controversial modern examples of protests. Now, although these range to different ends of the political spectrum, no matter where you fall, we can still take a lesson from both of these. The annual March for Life, which is an anti-abortion protest, and the annual March for Our Lives, which is an anti-gun violence protest and gun regulation protest, have both had long-term implications. This year, gun legislation passed the Senate for the first time in decades on a consequential level. Similarly, the Supreme Court enacted restrictions on the process of abortion. No matter where you fall on the spectrum, whether you agree with these decisions or not, it is impossible to deny that these protests, these long-term disagreements with the status quo have had an effect. They are shaping legislation within our society, and their influence must be acknowledged. Next, we can look to the right to vote. During the colonial era, only white male landowners had the ability to vote. It was a very unequal society, and power was distributed with a small few. In America, there was taxation without representation, and that became a rallying cry. Individuals wanted representation, and then they would pay their taxation. But taxation without representation is a fundamental problem of where the person falls within their society, whether or not their society respects them. It is through dissent, it is through peaceful protests and actions, which in America manifested as voting during the colonial period for our own representatives, which brought about some of this influential change that we see today. Similarly, the status of white male landowners has declined, and society has progressively become more equal. The rights of non-white people, the rights of women have been advanced over the years, but not without struggle. It is at the ballot box that change can be made, that representatives can be elected who support you and your values. Many people, especially people my age, say that voting doesn't matter. and it really bothers me. I look at examples like the U.S. Senate election in Nevada, where Catherine Cortez Masto won by just over 8,000 votes over her opponent Adam Laxalt. It was a razor-thin margin in a statewide contest. And if the amount of people who believed that their voice did not matter actually went out and voted for the opposing candidate, they could have switched the election and its results. But they didn't. But this is where the issue comes in. Getting involved, showing dissent within your society, whether in a presidential election or simply thinking about it in the context of your own neighborhood. People must make their own voices heard. If you don't believe that your vote will change an election, if you don't think that your race will turn out that you're voting in, if you don't think that the race you're voting in will turn out like, say, the Attorney General's race in Arizona, where Republican Abe Hameda lost by around 510 votes out of 2.5 million. If you can't believe in something like that, believe in your community. Believe that your vote balances out the vote of your neighbor, that you on a local level are making change, that when you might disagree with somebody and get huffy about it, this is your chance to actually show your values and what you support. So in a word, the value of dissent in society is unparalleled. It prevents the continuation of the status quo, it progresses us forward, it gives us social and political reform, and it puts us within the broader process. We become part of the system through dissent, whether that means protest, whether that means using our right to vote, or whether that means simply criticizing what we disagree with. It is a fundamental right as an American, and it must be used, or else you will forever be accepting the status quo, and even be deserving of the status quo that you get if you do not participate in the process. This is a right which must be used. Otherwise, I think Ms. Taylor Allison Swift would agree, there will be many cruel midnights still to come.
Awesome. Thank you, Aidan. We appreciate it. It's phenomenal to have young people. That's very, very, very difficult to do. I think we all know that. And you did a great job. And I know he enjoyed this more because at the end of the contest, you cannot applaud for anybody. So he just has to walk out of a room like that. They like it. This is a lot more fun right here. Thank you. Thank you.